44 days. That is how long Nancy Guthrie has been missing as of this time. 44 days since an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, limited mobility, and a heart full of love for her family was walked out of her home in the Catalina foothills in the middle of the night and vanished into the Arizona desert. In those 44 days, over 40,000 tips have been called in, 10,000 hours of surveillance footage have been reviewed. The FBI, Customs and Border Protection, cadaver dogs, genealogy specialists, and a dedicated joint task force have all been deployed. And not one person has been named a suspect, not one person of interest, not one arrest. Meanwhile, the questions keep stacking. Tommaso Cioni, the son-in-law who drove Nancy home that night, has not given a single public interview. Ani Guthrie's car sat in a police evidence bay for weeks before being returned with no public explanation of what was found. Dominic Evans, Tommaso's bandmate of 19 years, with felony convictions for burglary and robbery, a heightened build that matches the FBI's suspect description precisely, spoke to investigators for 40 minutes and has not been contacted since. A man named Derek Kayla was arrested for sending a ransom text, not to Savannah Guthrie, not to the FBI, but directly to Tommaso and Annie's personal phone. A neighbor's Ring cameras went dark on the exact night Nancy disappeared, but only on the side of the house facing her property. And her evening heart medication, the dose she was supposed to take within minutes of being dropped off, sat untouched on the kitchen counter the next morning while she was somewhere in the desert, without her hearing aids and without her phone. This week, the Arizona Republic published an investigation into the man running this case. And what they found explains more about why 44 days have passed without an arrest than anything else this investigation has produced. His name is Chris Nanos. He is the sheriff of Pima County. And this is the details of what his decisions have cost Nancy Guthrie. Let's move into it. The question this investigation keeps generating is whether 44 days without an arrest reflects an exceptionally sophisticated criminal or an exceptionally compromised response. The Arizona Republic's reporting this week answered it, not by speculating about the case, but by pulling the thread on the career of the man who has been standing at the front of every press conference since February 1st. Chris Nanos began his law enforcement career in El Paso, Texas, in 1976. What the Arizona Republic found in the department's own records is a 6-year stretch that produced 37 combined days of formal suspension. Late arrivals, absent shifts, off-duty conduct violations, insubordination. The kind of accumulating file that, in any profession requiring accountability to the public, signals a fundamental mismatch between a person and their role. In law enforcement, it signals something more specific. Someone who understands that consequences are negotiable if you know how to manage them. The incident that ended his time there involved a robbery suspect who left the scene of his arrest in an ambulance headed to the intensive care unit. Department records reviewed by the Arizona Republic described Nanos as the cause. The 15-day suspension that followed was the heaviest single penalty he received across his entire El Paso tenure. Internal records used the phrase consistent inefficiency to characterize his overall performance. That is bureaucratic language for a department that had made its decision and was building the documentation to act on it. Now, Nanos made the decision first, resigning in 1982 before the termination process completed. What happened next is the detail that reframes everything that followed. When Nanos' professional history entered the public record this week, the Arizona Republic found that his resume listed his El Paso service as concluding in 1984. The actual end date was 1982. 2 years, the exact span between his resignation and when he began building his Arizona career, had been quietly absorbed into his service record. A department spokesperson characterized the discrepancy as administrative. The statement did not explain why the administrative error ran in one direction only, adding time rather than removing it, covering precisely the gap between a forced exit and a fresh start. What he built in Arizona eventually became the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And in 2015, that department became the subject of a federal investigation. The FBI's inquiry focused on civil asset forfeiture funds, money legally required to flow back into law enforcement operations after being seized from criminal cases. The investigation found that hundreds of thousands of those dollars had been redirected. Among the documented expenditures, a $20,000 commercial kitchen constructed inside the department building, reportedly tied to a relative of one of Nanos's senior deputies. Chief Deputy Chris Radke was federally indicted in 2016. The investigation was ongoing when Radke took his own life. Nanos was not indicted, but the investigation happened inside his department, during his tenure, under his supervision. His public response was to go on local Tucson television and describe the FBI's investigative work as garbage. He said he was upset at the Bureau. He challenged agents to publicly retract the entire investigation. Former Chief Deputy Richard Castanjar told the Daily Mail that Nanos has carried a deep personal grievance against the FBI ever since, a grudge that, as Castanjar described it, has never resolved. That grievance did not retire in 2015. It was present in every joint decision made between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI from the moment Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker went silent. The 2024 election added another chapter. Facing a challenge from Lieutenant Heather Le Pen, one of his own senior officers, Nanos placed her on administrative leave weeks before the vote and restricted her movements during business hours, limiting her ability to campaign. Simultaneously, he suspended Sergeant Aaron Cross, the elected president of the Deputies Union, after Cross was photographed publicly holding a sign expressing opposition to Nanos's leadership. Both officers filed federal lawsuits. A county supervisor formally requested that the Attorney General and U.S. Attorney examine the actions as potential election interference. Nanos won by 481 votes. None of that is the most revealing number in his record. The most revealing number is 98. Before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, before this case, before the national cameras, 85 of 86 deputies in the Pima County Sheriff's Department had formally voted no confidence in Chris Nanos. The people who ride in his patrol cars, execute his warrants, and process his crime scenes looked at their own leadership and declared in writing that they did not trust it. That was not a reaction to this case. It was the institutional verdict on the man who would be handed the most watched missing persons investigation in the country when February 1st arrived. On the morning of February 1st, Nanos made a decision that most investigators would consider correct. He responded to Nancy's property in person, something he told reporters he does not normally do for missing persons cases. He recognized that what he was looking at did not fit the profile of a standard disappearance. Blood at the entrance confirmed as Nancy's. The doorbell camera physically removed from its wall mount rather than simply disabled. Daily heart medication untouched on the kitchen counter. He understood the scene. The problem is that understanding a crime scene and protecting its forensic integrity are entirely separate competencies. And the second one is where the case began to fracture. Standard protocol for a scene of this nature, a forced removal, biological evidence at the point of entry, no identified suspect, no confirmed sighting of the victim, requires the property to be treated as an active forensic site for as long as the investigation demands. Not hours, days, weeks if necessary. Every surface is a potential evidence source. Every threshold is a contact point. The scene is not released until specialists have documented, sampled, and cleared it with the thoroughness that a prosecution will eventually require. Nanos released Nancy's property in under 20 hours. What followed reads like a systematic dismantling of the forensic integrity that the scene had retained. A pool service company with no documented prior relationship with Nancy arrived and was escorted onto the backyard by a sheriff's deputy. A landscaping crew came with equipment. Food was delivered to the address. A home health aide passed through. Journalists reached the front entrance and photographed the blood evidence still visible on the ground. In the days after the scene was supposedly closed, neighbors observed no consistent law enforcement presence, managing who came and went from the property. Every person who crossed that threshold after the crime scene was released left something behind: skin cells, hair follicles, shoe impressions, airborne biological material. And every deposit they left mixed into the forensic layer that the suspect had already created. Forensic science operates on the principle that physical contact between two surfaces always produces a transfer in both directions. You cannot introduce dozens of uncontrolled individuals into an active crime scene and then ask a laboratory to separate what the suspect left from what the pool service left, from what the delivery driver left. The contamination compounds with every body that enters. And in a courtroom, a defense attorney does not need to prove their client's innocence. They need to introduce enough doubt about the evidence's chain of custody to prevent a conviction. This scene gave any future defense attorney years of material before the first week was over. Forensic death investigator Joe Scott Morgan reviewed what happened to that property publicly and used specific language worth noting. He called it a complete breakdown of protocol, pointing in particular to the absence of a single designated officer whose sole responsibility was to control access, maintain a written log of every entry, and document the reason for each person's presence. That role exists in forensic procedure for one reason. The log is what a prosecutor uses in court to defend the integrity of the evidence. Without it, the chain of custody has gaps. And gaps are where cases that should close instead collapse. Morgan stated plainly that the DNA this investigation is depending on may carry contamination from individuals who had no connection to the crime, but whose access to the scene was never controlled or recorded. The FBI's return to the property for a camera that had been missed during the initial sweep confirmed what Morgan's assessment implied. A roof-mounted camera, a fixed piece of hardware in a fixed position, was not identified during the first evidence collection pass through the most consequential crime scene in Arizona. Google engineers had to be brought in specifically to attempt recovery of whatever data the device had retained. The first sweep missed an entire camera, and the scene it sat above had already been released to uncontrolled access before anyone realized the device existed. When the mixed biological evidence was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the sample that may contain the genetic profile of whoever removed her, the question of where to send it for analysis was not a logistical preference. It was an operational decision with direct consequences for the speed of this investigation and potentially for Nancy's life. The FBI Laboratory Division at Quantico, Virginia, operates one of the most advanced forensic processing facilities on Earth. It maintains dedicated rapid response protocols specifically designed for active kidnapping cases. Because in a kidnapping, the difference between a result in 2 weeks and a result in 6 months is not administrative. It is the margin between finding someone alive and not finding them at all. That facility exists for exactly this situation. Nano sent the DNA to a private laboratory in Florida. His public explanation? He did not want evidence split between two facilities, and the Florida lab already had other samples from the case. Former Arizona Supreme Court Justice Andrew Gould responded to that reasoning on Fox News by stating directly that the sheriff had made mistakes that impeded the investigation. A former justice of the state's highest court selecting the word impeded on national television is not casual observation. That is a legal mind, choosing a legal term with precision. Impeded means the investigation's progress was slowed by a decision that did not have to be made that way. Nanos himself told NBC that DNA processing could take weeks, months, or up to a year. He said it in front of a national audience, with the same matter-of-fact delivery he uses for everything. An 84-year-old woman's life is somewhere in the balance, and the man running the investigation is on television, explaining why a year is a reasonable timeline. Okay, and the Quantico option was available. The rapid response protocol was available. The Grudge from 2015, the one where he called FBI work garbage on local television, was also available. And it is not unreasonable to ask which of those three things carried the most weight when the packaging decision was made. Meanwhile, the glove DNA, recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home along a documented escape route, came back to a local restaurant employee with no documented connection to the case. That thread is closed. The only remaining biological profile with forensic significance in this investigation is the mixed sample sitting in Florida. The sample that was not sent to Quantico. The sample that Nanos told the country could take up to a year to process. A complex investigation involving multiple agencies, the FBI, Pima County Sheriff's Department, Customs and Border Protection, requires one thing above everything else from the person at the top of the local chain: discipline. The discipline to communicate consistently. The discipline to say nothing rather than say something wrong. The discipline to let the evidence speak rather than letting your own voice get in the way of it. Chris Nanos has demonstrated none of these qualities across 44 days of national attention. The glove contradiction is the clearest example. The FBI told News Nation through an official source that a glove had been discovered inside Nancy Guthrie's residence. On the same day, Nanos appeared on Fox News and stated with complete confidence that no glove was ever found on that property. Not possibly not found. Definitively not found. Never recovered. Two institutions speaking about the same piece of physical evidence with directly contradictory accounts on the same day to different outlets. One of them was wrong. Neither one explained it publicly. 4 separate television networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, each reported through their own independent law enforcement sources that the masked figure had appeared at Nancy's door on multiple occasions before the night she was taken. The reporting included specific visual evidence from footage showing the suspect across what appeared to be different visits. Nanos's department issued a written statement calling the reporting from all 4 networks purely speculative. 4 independent editorial teams, 4 separate law enforcement sources, and the sheriff of Pima County dismissing all of it with a single press release adjective. Rather than holding structured press conferences where every journalist receives the same information at the same time, the standard protocol in high-profile federal investigations, Nanos granted individual sit-down interviews with separate outlets. Fox News received one version of the investigation's status. NBC received another. The Daily Mail received a third. The BBC received a fourth. Retired FBI supervisory agent James Galliano identified this directly as a fundamental messaging failure. Information released in fits and starts, statements walked back, things described incorrectly to different audiences. Retired FBI Special Agent Robin Drake offered a more structural assessment, but he described Nanos as functioning like an unintentional attention absorber, generating enough controversy and contradiction that the media story becomes about the sheriff rather than about the evidence. While the press is covering Nanos's latest contradiction, it is not covering the DNA. It is not covering the suspect. It is not covering Nancy. Drake raised a concern that cuts deeper than bad press management. He suggested the 98% no confidence vote may have created a situation where the detectives working this case are not fully briefing their own sheriff. If investigators know that whatever they share with Nanos could surface in a solo interview the next morning, phrased incorrectly, timed badly, or directly contradicted by something he told a different outlet an hour earlier, they protect the case by limiting what flows upward. Nanos speaks from incomplete information. The statements come out wrong. The press reports the contradictions. The investigation drowns in noise while the actual forensic work happens around the leadership rather than through it. Then came the pacemaker. Nancy Guthrie's cardiac device syncs its data through Bluetooth. Investigators equipped a helicopter with technology capable of detecting that signal from the air, flying grid patterns over the desert surrounding her neighborhood, searching for a transmission. No warrant required for airspace. No ground team alerting anyone on the surface. Silent, invisible. A search tool that required only time and complete operational confidentiality to work. But that capability was reported in the press before every grid had been covered, before the technology had been given its full search window. Whoever is holding Nancy, or whoever made the decision about where she would be, learned from a news broadcast that a helicopter could locate her pacemaker by its signal. The signal has not been detected since. That operational window closed the moment it was published. And the question of how it reached the press In an investigation where Nanos was conducting individual interviews with multiple outlets simultaneously is not a question that answers itself. The initial ground search around Nancy Guthrie's property was set at a 2-mile radius. That perimeter determined which neighbors received door-to-door contact from investigators, which ring cameras were canvassed, which driveways were checked for tire impressions, which properties sat inside the investigation's active geographic attention, and which sat outside it. A couple living on Camino Royale, approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, had a ring camera that captured a vehicle moving at speed through the area at 2:36 a.m. on February 1st. Nancy's pacemaker sent its last recorded signal at 2:28 a.m. NBC correspondent Liz Kreutz drove the route between Nancy's property and that camera location. The drive takes approximately 6 minutes. The timing aligns. The sheriff confirmed to NBC that the vehicle timing matched the abduction window and that it was part of the active investigation. That couple was never contacted by law enforcement. They brought the footage forward themselves after watching news coverage and recognizing the timing. They checked their own camera on their own initiative and walked the evidence to investigators voluntarily. The perimeter had been drawn 1/2 mile too short. A potentially significant piece of evidence sat outside the canvas zone for nearly 4 weeks before the people who had it knew to come forward. The Wi-Fi disruption follows the same pattern. On March 6th, 34 days into the investigation, FBI agents went door to door in Nancy's neighborhood, asking whether anyone had experienced internet connectivity problems on the night she was taken. Though 34 days. For 5 weeks, no one with a badge had asked the neighbors whether their cameras were functioning that night. The neighbor whose ring system went dark on the side of the house facing Nancy's property did not discover the missing footage because an investigator told them to check. They discovered it themselves. Their dog had woken them that night, acting completely out of character, staring toward Nancy's property. At the exact moment the cameras facing that direction lost their connection. That detail, the dog, the directional outage, the timing, existed from day one. It was sitting in a neighbor's camera history and in a family's memory of an unusual night. It took 34 days for anyone to ask. The Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, a volunteer search organization from Mexico, with a publicly documented record of over 5,000 recoveries of missing persons in desert terrain identical to what surrounds Tucson, traveled to Arizona specifically for this case and offered their full operational resources. They were turned away. The United Cajun Navy offered their complete search package. They received no response. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffendafer questioned publicly why Nanos keeps declining proven organizations with established track records in exactly the terrain where Nancy may be located. No public explanation has been offered. And then, there is the cross-border question. Tucson sits 60 miles from the Mexican border. Interstate 19 runs directly south. The FBI confirmed contact with Mexican law enforcement through its sub-office in Sonora. But when reporters asked Mexican officials directly, the response was that no formal request had been made. The American side said coordination was active. The Mexican side said no one had called. One more statement from this investigation that does not survive contact with the people it claims to involve. While the sheriff's operational failures were accumulating, a development emerged that has not received the analytical weight it deserves. A man named Derek Kayla was arrested in connection with this investigation for sending a ransom-related communication, not to Savannah Guthrie, not to the FBI tip line, not to any public channel, to Tommaso Cioni and Ani Guthrie's personal phone. Think about what that targeting requires. To send a message directly to a private individual's personal number, rather than to the family's public representative, to the law enforcement tip line, or to a media outlet. You need that number. A private number. The kind of number that does not appear in a public directory. The kind of number that circulates within a social circle, not beyond it. Kayla's connection to the Tucson music scene places him in the same social orbit as Tommaso Cioni. In the previous videos in this series, we documented Tommaso's 19-year relationship with Dominic Evans through their band Early Black. and the network of musicians and associates that surrounds that world in Tucson. The fact that a ransom communication was directed to a private personal number belonging to the son-in-law who last saw Nancy alive, rather than to any public channel, is a detail that maps directly onto the social network framework this investigation has been building. Someone who knew that number was part of a circle, and that circle has been the center of this investigation since the first week. No charge has been filed connecting Kayla to Nancy's actual disappearance. But the specificity of who received that message and the social geography that explains how the sender had access to that number is a thread that the forensic work now running in the background will either confirm or eliminate. The cell tower data, the device records, and the contact network analysis extracted from the family's digital devices are all capable of placing any specific phone in any specific location at any specific time. The question of how Derek Kayla had Tommaso Cioni's personal number is one this investigation will eventually answer whether anyone volunteers it or not. Here's the part of this case that matters most and gets the least attention. The detectives on the Joint Task Force, the 4 officers and the sergeant from Pima County Sheriff's Department, now working full-time out of the FBI's Tucson Federal Building, did not choose their leadership. They are doing the work this case requires, inside a structure built by a man whose career record this video has just laid out. They are running cell tower cross-references. They are processing the camera outage footprint map. Now, they are building forensic requests through proper federal channels. They are doing the slow, precise, unglamorous work that actually closes cases. And they are doing it despite the noise above them, rather than because of it. Genetic genealogy is active on both DNA profiles recovered from this case. C.C. Moore of Parabon Nanolabs, the analyst whose work helped identify the Golden State Killer after 4 decades, has confirmed this publicly and expressed complete confidence in eventual identification. Her word was time, not possibility. Time. 2 profiles means 2 independent family trees being built simultaneously from public ancestry databases. 2 separate chains of ancestry that each need only one distant relative, one third cousin who used a consumer DNA service years ago without a second thought, to produce a name. The cell tower data from January 23rd, the night of the dress rehearsal, the night the backward walker tested the camera sensor lag 6.5 miles from Nancy's home, is being cross-referenced against the tower data from February 1st. That night was supposed to be invisible. The suspect almost certainly did not take the same precautions on January 23rd that they would have taken 9 days later. Their phone was probably in their pocket. They probably drove their own vehicle. That data is in the tower records, and the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team is working through it. The router from Nancy's home has been in FBI possession since the first week of February. Every device that came within wireless range of that router on the night of February 1st, even devices that never connected to the network, may have left a probe request in its logs. A MAC address, a device identifier, a list of previously connected networks that can identify where a phone calls home. Router log analysis does not take months. It takes hours. Whatever fingerprint exists in those logs has already been read by someone in that federal building. Retired FBI agent Andrew Miller pushed back directly against suggestions of a cold case trajectory. He said this is nowhere near a cold case. There is still science out that has not come back. There are still viable leads being processed. As the reward, structured strategically and released at the moment, investigators calculated it would re-energize the tip flow, was not a desperate measure. It was a tactical deployment. The investigation is building. It is just building inside a structure that its own leadership has been complicating from day one. Retired FBI Special Agent Steve Moore offered the most precise public assessment of where this investigation actually stands. He said the reason the reward has not been claimed is straightforward. The only people with knowledge of what happened are the people who did it. They have not told anyone outside their circle. There is no peripheral witness sitting on information, weighing whether to come forward. The circle is sealed. That means this case will not be broken by a tip. It will be broken by forensic science, by DNA, by cell tower data, by the family tree that closes on a name. The science does not need the sheriff to be competent. It needs time and a laboratory. Both are running. Sheriff Nanos appeared on NBC this week and said investigators are definitely closer. He said he personally believes he knows the motive. He said he believes Nancy Guthrie is still alive. And then he warned the public, do not assume you are safe because this happened to the Guthrie family. 44 days in. No suspect named. No person of interest. No arrest. And a warning to the public that the person who did this might do it again. That warning and that record exist simultaneously. And the gap between them is the gap between a law enforcement leader and a man who has spent 44 years learning how to survive scrutiny without changing anything about how he operates. Now, he was not used to everyone hanging on his every word and holding him accountable. He said that himself on day 3. He was right. He had operated for decades without this level of national attention. The 37 suspension days in El Paso never made national news. The ICU in Texas never made national news. The 2 years added to a resume never made national news. The 2015 federal investigation never made national news. The 98% no confidence vote never made national news. Nancy Guthrie changed all of that. And the country that is now watching this case unfold is watching it with the full picture of who has been managing it. Her evening medication is still on that counter in evidence photographs. Her hearing aids were in the house when she was taken. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her car was in the garage. She weighed 150 pounds. She was 84 years old, and somewhere in the Arizona desert or beyond it, she is waiting for the science to do what the leadership has not. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, a conversation you heard, a behavioral change you noticed after February 1st, a purchase that did not make sense, a route someone drove that was never explained. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's tip line is 5203-514-900. Online submissions can be made at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. Anonymous tips are accepted. And the call you make today may be the one that brings her home. We have now covered the full picture. The crime scene released in under 20 hours. The DNA sent to Florida instead of Quantico. The pacemaker tracking operation leaked before it could finish. The search perimeter drawn half a mile too short. The contradictions on national television. The ransom text sent directly to Tommaso and Annie's personal phone. The volunteer search organizations turned away. And the 44-year record of the man who has been managing all of it. The science running right now, the genetic genealogy, the cell tower cross-reference, the router logs, the device footprint map, does not require competent leadership to deliver its results. It requires time, and time is the one resource this investigation cannot recover once it is gone. Nancy Guthrie deserves better than what this investigation has given her. Her family deserves better. And the truth about what happened on February 1st in 2026 deserves to be reached by the most direct forensic path available, not the path shaped by a grudge from 2015 or a resume that was quietly adjusted before arriving in Arizona. If this analysis gave you something the mainstream coverage has not, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. The moment a development breaks in this case, this channel will be the first place the full picture lands. Hit the like button if you believe this case deserves the level of scrutiny this series has been applying to it. Share this video with anyone following the investigation, because the more people understand what has gone wrong here, the harder it becomes for those failures to stay buried. And drop your answer in the comments. After everything laid out in this video, the crime scene contamination, the laboratory decision, the leaked pacemaker operation, the search perimeter that missed critical evidence, the 44-year record of the man running the investigation, do you believe the Nancy Guthrie case has been managed with the professionalism and urgency that an 84-year-old woman's life required? And do you believe that if it had been, we would still be here 44 days later without a single arrest? Tell me what you think. Because this community has been asking the right questions from the beginning. And the right questions are the only thing keeping this case in the national conversation where it belongs.